At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law smashed my face into the hot mashed potatoes. "Taste the family meal, old man," she hissed through her perfect smile, and the laughter in her throat felt sharper than the silver fork she had just dropped. The heat seared my cheek, but the humiliation burned faster, sprinting ahead of the pain as the ballroom gasped. Someone screamed, not because of the potatoes, but because they suddenly realized who I was. "He's a billionaire," a stranger whispered, loud enough for the chandeliers to shiver. And in that moment, I knew two things. First, I had lost my son the instant he chose her. And second, if I failed to act now, I would lose him forever. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. It helps me know I'm not alone in telling this story. The ballroom was the kind of dream money buys when money itself wants to show off. Light poured from chandeliers like tamed comets, napkins folded into swans perched on plates, and the band played love songs that sanded every edge off the evening. I sat at table 14, 2 football fields away from the head table, exiled among distant cousins who smiled politely and spoke to me in short sentences like they'd been warned not to linger. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need a center seat to watch my boy begin his life. I just needed to be there. Daniel looked handsome in the tuxedo we'd rented together back when he thought money was tight. He was nervous, wiping his eyes as his bride glided down the aisle, white silk rolling like fog across a lake. For a fleeting second, hope loosened the bands around my chest. Maybe she'd be the bridge back to him. Maybe this night could mend years of distance and sacrifice. Dinner arrived, prime rib, green beans snapping under teeth, potatoes steaming under butter gloss. But I wasn't to tasting anything. I was memorizing Daniel's laugh, the same laugh that once filled my truck on late-night drives back from soccer games. Her laugh was brighter, hungrier, pulling every glance in the room like a magnet. Half a glass into the champagne toast, I felt her presence before I saw her. "Mr. Hale," she said, loud enough for 3 tables to turn. Her smile was lacquered, perfect, too shiny to be real. "We just wanted to thank you." "You're welcome, dear," I answered, napkin still resting on my lap, my voice steady even as I smelled the champagne on her breath, sharp, citrus, reckless. "For everything you've done for Daniel," she added, and then, with just the smallest shift in tone, "all those nights you were busy, all those games you missed, the conferences, the dinners. You chose work over your son, and now you want to play Father of the Year?" Chairs hushed, phones tilted. My skin prickled with heat before the potatoes did. She didn't stop. Her hand shoved me back, and the plate flashed white, then impact. Hot starch, salt, and shame smeared across my face. And in that silence, humiliation dripping from me like gravy, someone at the bar broke it with a laugh that wasn't laughter at all. "Do you even know who that man is?" The room shifted, eyebrows recalculated, phones rose higher. Daniel was nowhere, and I stood in the wreckage of my own celebration, realizing the night wasn't about love, it was about war. The ballroom didn't breathe. Even the chandeliers seemed frozen in their crystal chains, watching me like witnesses in a trial. I wiped at my face, but the mashed potatoes clung to me stubbornly, butter slicking across my beard as though humiliation had its own glue. No one moved to help me. No one offered a napkin. They all just stared, like I had suddenly become a circus act instead of a father who had sacrificed everything. My son's wife, my new daughter-in-law, stood triumphant at the head table, her smile glinting sharper than any diamond on her finger. I looked for Daniel, my boy, the one I had carried on my shoulders through muddy fields, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest as the television flickered in the background. He was there, but his eyes weren't mine anymore. They were hers. They were wide with surprise, yes, but also something else, a fear of disappointing her, a hesitation to stand for me. It cut deeper than the laughter trickling from the corners of the room. I straightened slowly, the starch on my cheek cooling into cement, my chair scraping across the marble floor. "Excuse me," I said, my voice rough but not broken. No one answered. Forks clinked. Whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass. A camera flash burned the air, and I knew by morning my shame would be immortalized online, forever pinned to my name. As I turned to leave, I caught fragments of their words. "He's rich, isn't he?" "Billionaire." "No way. Look at his suit. It's off the rack." "If he's really that wealthy, why is he eating here like the rest of us?" That was the knife, twisted clean. I had lived my life deliberately modest, never flaunting the empire I'd built brick by brick, one night shift at a time, one deal after another. My son never knew the truth because I wanted him to learn grit, not greed. I wanted him to fight his own battles, not sail through life on my victories. But now, that secret was ripped open in the most cruel way, by the very woman he had chosen to love. I pushed open the double doors, the cold hallway swallowing me. The sound of music and laughter resumed the moment I was gone, like the wedding hadn't just turned into a battlefield. My hands trembled as I reached the restroom. I splashed water on my face, chunks of potato swirling down the sink. The man in the mirror didn't look like me. He looked older, weaker, like the years had finally demanded their due. For the first time in a long time, I felt the sharp weight of loneliness. I had dreamed that this day would heal the cracks between me and Daniel, that maybe I would finally hear the words, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Instead, I walked out with the bitter taste of shame clinging to my tongue. But shame can harden into something else, something sharper. And as I left that bathroom, one truth began to crystallize inside me. I wasn't just going to survive this humiliation. I was going to make them regret it. The cold air of the corridor clung to me as I walked, but it couldn't cool the heat burning inside my chest. I wanted to leave the building, vanish into the night, but some invisible chain pulled me back toward the reception hall. My son's laughter, faint under the music, echoed in my mind like a ghost of years gone by. I turned slightly, peering through the crack of the door, and there it was, the life he chose, the life that had no space for me anymore. He sat beside her, her hand wrapped around his arm like a leash, disguised as love. He leaned into her when she whispered, his head nodding like every word she said was gospel. My stomach twisted. Someone at the nearest table spoke louder than they realized. "He's not just rich, he's a billionaire. I swear I saw it online." The words sliced through the hall like a blade, drawing gasps, raising eyebrows, sparking curiosity. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the potatoes or the humiliation. It was about me, the man they thought they knew, now revealed as something else entirely. Eyes darted toward me, even through the crack of the door, scanning, calculating. Phones slipped into hands, ready to capture, ready to post. And I knew then that this night wasn't an accident. It was a carefully staged play. She had known. She had planned. That smile of hers when she shoved my face into the food wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy, to expose me, to control the narrative before I even had a chance to speak. I pulled back into the shadows, heart pounding. Memories of my sacrifices replayed like cruel reminders. The nights I worked double shifts at the factory, skin raw from calluses, while Daniel slept in the back seat of my old truck. The years I invested every penny, building slowly, silently, until I had turned sweat and scars into an empire. I never told him. I never wanted him to see life through a lens of wealth. I wanted him to fight, to learn resilience, to know that love and grit mattered more than dollars. But now, the very secret I kept to protect him had become the weapon used to destroy me. The music swelled again inside. Toasts rang out, glasses clinked, and my son, my boy, raised his glass at her prompting, smiling faintly. It was the smile of a man who didn't yet realize he was walking into a trap, one carefully laid out by the woman on his arm. I stepped back from the door, clenching my fists until the nails bit into my palms. The humiliation was still fresh on my skin, but it was no longer just about me. It was about him, about saving him from her, from the poison she was pouring into his veins, one whisper at a time. As I walked out into the night air, the stars above seemed cruel in their indifference. My heart was heavy, but my resolve hardened. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me, but she had only lit the fire of a father who was ready to fight back. The night outside was colder than I expected, sharp enough to sting my lungs with each breath. I pulled my coat tighter, but the chill wasn't what hurt. It was the sound of music, echoing faintly from the ballroom behind me, the life I had just been pushed out of. I walked across the parking lot slowly, each step heavy, like I was dragging the weight of years of sacrifice across the asphalt. My reflection in the dark windows of the hall looked like a stranger, slumped shoulders, food stains down the front of my jacket, a man unrecognizable even to himself. "Dad!" The voice pierced the night, weak and hesitant. I turned just enough to see Daniel standing at the edge of the doorway, framed by golden light spilling from inside. For a second my heart nearly betrayed me, nearly softened, but then I saw her behind him, her hand pressed into his back, urging him forward. Her eyes were knives, daring me to step closer, daring me to break. I couldn't, not like this, not with her watching. So I shook my head slowly, the weight of a lifetime in that single gesture. "Go back inside, son," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the wind. His mouth opened as if to argue, but her hand tightened on him, and he faltered. That hesitation cut deeper than the potatoes ever could. He chose her silence over my dignity. I turned away and kept walking until the doors closed behind him, muffling the laughter, the toasts, the future I no longer belonged to. My truck sat at the far end of the lot, rust freckling the sides, the same truck that had carried him to school, to games, to late-night drives when the world felt too big for him. I slid behind the wheel, the leather cracked and stiff, and rested my forehead against it. My chest heaved with something between rage and grief. The drive home was a blur of headlights and empty streets. Each traffic light bled into the next until I pulled into my driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. The house was dark, silent, waiting. I stepped inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the shadows that stretched across the floor. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the storm rising inside me. I thought of the empire I had built in secret, the contracts, the investments, the late nights and lonely mornings. Every dollar was a brick in a fortress I thought would one day protect him. But tonight, that fortress felt like a prison, a secret that had driven a wedge between us, one she now exploited with cruel precision. For a long time I sat there, the silence thick around me. No tears came. They had been burned away by something sharper, something colder. She thought she had humiliated me, broken me in front of the world. But humiliation doesn't kill a man like me, it carves him into steel. And in that silence, one truth anchored itself in my bones. If she wanted war, then war was exactly what she would get. The house creaked around me that night, every board and nail carrying echoes of the years I had poured into it. It wasn't grand, not like the mansions people imagined when they heard the word billionaire. It was plain, modest, a house where I raised my son with my own 2 hands. I could still see the marks on the doorframe where I had measured Daniel's height year after year, his pencil scratches, climbing slowly upward like a timeline carved into wood. That house was built on sacrifice, not on show, and that was exactly why I never let him see the truth of what I had built outside its walls. I remembered the nights I'd leave work at the factory, my body so beaten that my knuckles were split open and my back screamed like it might snap. Yet I'd still head to the small office I'd rented above a laundromat, where I studied contracts, flipped through ledgers, and taught myself what no college had ever given me. I made deals that others thought were madness. I invested in companies nobody believed in. I gambled not with cards, but with sweat, instinct, and hours stolen from my own sleep. Slowly, painfully, I turned pennies into dollars, and dollars into millions. I never told Daniel. He was just a boy then, and later a teenager. I wanted him to grow up hungry, not for food, but for life. I wanted him to know the sting of rejection, the fire of working for something, the satisfaction of building his own name. If I had told him about the money, about the empire I was building in secret, he would have grown up soft, entitled, shielded from the grit that shapes a man. So I let him think we were just getting by. I let him believe every scraped knee and patched shoe mattered, because in truth, they did. But now that choice, the choice I thought was love, was the very one tearing us apart. She had found out, and she had twisted it into a dagger. To Daniel, it must have looked like betrayal, like I had lied to him all his life, hoarding wealth while he struggled. He couldn't see the reason, not yet. All he saw was the wedge she had driven between us, painted with her poisonous words. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence, steady and unchanging, unlike everything else in my life. I thought of the times I had missed, school plays, late-night talks, dinners where my chair sat empty. I had always believed the end would justify the means, that one day he would understand why I sacrificed presents for provision. But maybe I had been wrong. Maybe all he saw was absence. The shame of that truth cut deeper than her laughter ever could. But shame, once again, began to harden into something else. I had built an empire from nothing, clawed my way through every obstacle life set before me, and now I would use every ounce of that cunning, every tool at my disposal to protect him, even if it meant he would hate me for it. 2 days passed before Daniel called me. His voice was clipped, hesitant, the way a man speaks when he's carrying someone else's anger in his throat. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked, but it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like an order. I agreed, though every bone in me braced for the blow I knew was coming. We met at a small cafe downtown, one I had chosen because it was quiet, neutral ground. I arrived early, as always. Old habits die hard. I had built a fortune by never being late. I sat at a corner table, black coffee cooling in front of me, watching the door with a mix of dread and hope. When Daniel walked in, my heart clenched. He looked good in his pressed shirt and new shoes, better than I ever dressed at his age, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders, a distance in his eyes. He wasn't coming as my son, he was coming as her soldier. "Dad," he said flatly, sliding into the chair opposite me. No hug, no warmth, just the word, like punctuation at the end of a long silence. "Daniel," I replied, searching his face for some sign of the boy I had raised. He didn't waste time. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was sharper than I expected, laced with resentment. "All these years, all those nights we struggled, and you were sitting on a fortune." I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. It wasn't like that. I wasn't sitting on anything in the beginning. I was building, piece by piece. You saw the late nights, the double shifts. That was real. Every scar on my hands was real. I turned my palms upward, showing the calluses that never faded. I kept it from you because I wanted you to be strong, to know what it means to fight for something. His jaw tightened, his fingers tapping the table in a restless rhythm. Fight for what? For empty cupboards? For used sneakers while you invested in strangers' companies? Do you have any idea what it felt like to believe we were barely scraping by, while my friends lived comfortably? I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. Yes, I know, I felt it too. Every time I couldn't give you what you wanted, I felt it. But I also knew that one day you'd thank me for teaching you grit, for showing you how to stand on your own. He shook his head, bitter laughter spilling out. Or maybe you just didn't trust me. Maybe you thought I'd be weak. Maybe you thought I'd waste it. I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. She was right about you. You hide things. You keep secrets. You play games with people's lives. Her shadow hung over every word he spoke. I could see her hand in the way his sentences curved, in the venom that wasn't his own. My son was sitting in front of me, but it was her voice I was hearing. I sat back, forcing myself not to react, though every word was a knife. If he thought me secretive, if he thought me deceptive, then perhaps that was exactly what I needed to be, not for myself, but for him. Daniel's eyes had always been a mirror of mine when he was a boy, bright, curious, searching. Now they were glassy, cold, like windows that had been boarded shut. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, but the sharpness in it carried farther than any shout. "You think I don't see—" "Sit! You've been judging her since the day we met. You've never given her a chance." I clasped my hands on the table, the steam from my untouched coffee rising between us like smoke on a battlefield. "I've given her more chances than you know," I said carefully. "But what I see in her eyes, it isn't love, Daniel. It's calculation. She wants control, not family." He scoffed, shaking his head as if I had just confirmed her every whisper in his ear. "That's what she said you'd say, that you'd twist things to make her look bad. She's been honest with me since the beginning. She told me the truth about your money, before you ever had the guts to. She said you'd try to poison me against her because you're jealous that someone else has my loyalty now." The words slammed into me harder than any blow. Jealous? Was that really what she had painted me as? A bitter old man afraid of being replaced? I wanted to slam my fist down, to roar the truth into his ears until he had no choice but to see it. But rage would only prove her right, so I swallowed the fire. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to grow strong," I said, forcing calm. "She told you because she wants you weak, dependent on her, blind to what she's doing." Daniel's jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist on the table. "You don't know her like I do. She's the one who sat up with me when I couldn't sleep. She's the one who pushed me to believe in myself when you were too busy building empires. She's the one who loves me." His voice cracked at the last word, but he covered it quickly, like even showing a flicker of doubt was betrayal to her. I felt something heavy press against my ribs. That word, love. I had worked my whole life to give him security, but I had left gaps where love should have been obvious, and she had filled them, with whispers sweet enough to rot his soul from the inside out. I reached across the table slowly, placing my hand near his. "Son, I've spent my life fighting battles you'll never know. Every scar, every sacrifice, it was all for you. But the hardest battle I'll ever fight is the one against the person who's standing between us right now." He pulled his hand back sharply, eyes flashing. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. She's my wife. She's my family. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong in my life." The words rang louder than the clinking cups and quiet chatter of the cafe. For a moment, the whole world shrank until it was just me, my son, and the knife he had just plunged into my chest without even realizing it. And as I sat there, swallowing the taste of betrayal, one truth burned hotter than ever. If I didn't expose her soon, I would lose him completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, the ceiling above me nothing but a blank canvas for the thoughts I couldn't quiet. Daniel's words replayed again and again, each repetition twisting the knife deeper. He had chosen her over me, not just once, not just in a single argument, but in his heart. She had rooted herself so deep inside him that every word he spoke now carried her fingerprints, and if I didn't act, she would own him completely. I got out of bed before dawn, the house still and silent, the world outside tinted with the blue of early morning. I brewed coffee strong enough to burn, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the leather notebook where I'd always kept my most important numbers. I flipped past old contacts, deal-makers, contractors, bankers, until I landed on a name I hadn't called in years. His name was Victor Kane, once a detective, now a private investigator with a reputation for digging into places people preferred to keep buried. We had crossed paths years ago when I needed quiet background checks before making a deal. He was thorough, discreet, and above all, ruthless with the truth. He owed me a favor, and I intended to collect. By noon I was sitting across from him in a diner that smelled of bacon grease and burnt toast. Victor was older, heavier around the middle, his hair thinned to a stubborn strip across the top of his head, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were sharp, cold, like they could cut through walls. "You're looking worse for wear, Hale," he said, sliding into the booth with the ease of a man who noticed everything. "Wedding didn't go as planned." I clenched my jaw, staring into my coffee. "You could say that. I need you to look into someone, quietly." I slid a slip of paper across the table with her name on it. He picked it up, whistling softly as he read. "New daughter-in-law, huh? Trouble already?" "She's more than trouble. She's poison. She's driving a wedge between me and Daniel, and I can't let her win. I need everything, her past, her debts, the skeletons she thinks are still buried." Victor leaned back, rubbing his chin. "That'll cost you. Money isn't the issue." My voice was sharper than I meant, but it was true. Money was the least of my problems. "Time is. The longer she has influence over him, the deeper she sinks her claws. I need leverage, and I need it fast." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me a week. Maybe less. People like her don't stay clean for long." As I left the diner, a strange mixture of dread and determination settled over me. I hated that it had come to this, that I needed to dig into someone my son loved, but I knew it was the only way. Daniel couldn't see her for what she was, so I would show him. Even if the truth shattered him, it was better than watching him drown in her lies. And as the door swung shut behind me, I whispered a silent promise to myself. She wanted a war? She'd just declared it on the wrong man. Victor worked fast. 3 days later, he called me to meet him in his office on the far side of town. It was the kind of place no one would think to look for answers. An aging brick building tucked between a pawn shop and a shuttered bakery. Blinds half drawn, the smell of stale cigarettes clinging to the walls. His desk was buried under folders, photographs, and the kind of clutter that told you he lived in pursuit of secrets. He didn't waste time with greetings. The moment I sat down, he slid a thick manila folder across the desk toward me. "Your daughter." "Ter-in-law," he said flatly. "She's got a past, and it isn't pretty." I opened it slowly, my stomach tightening with every page. The first photo was of her with a man twice her age, leaning close at a bar, her smile sharp and calculated. Beneath it, a note. Married in Nevada. Annulled after 6 months. Financial settlement undisclosed. The next set showed her with another man, this one younger, dressed in a suit, his hand heavy on her waist. Divorced after 2 years. Husband filed bankruptcy 6 months later. The pattern repeated. Wealthy men, short marriages, financial collapse, or unexplained transfers of assets. 3 names, 3 lives unraveled, and now Daniel was the 4th. I flipped through receipts, copies of bank statements, legal documents, loans she had taken under different aliases, credit cards maxed and abandoned, whispered allegations of fraud, though never enough for charges to stick. She was a ghost who lived in shadows, feeding off ambition and leaving ruin in her wake. Victor leaned back, his chair creaking. She's clever. Always leaves just enough distance to keep her hands clean. Lets the men fall apart while she walks away with cash, property, or connections. She's not new at this. She's a professional. My hands trembled as I gripped the folder. Each page was a nail in the coffin of the trust I had tried to hold on to. I thought of Daniel's face at the cafe, the way he defended her so fiercely. He wasn't in love with her. He was ensnared, just like the others before him. She had sunk her claws into his heart, and now she was aiming for his future. She's going to bleed him dry, I muttered, my voice raw. Victor nodded grimly, and she'll smile while she does it. I closed the folder and slid it back to him, my jaw tight. I need copies. Every page, every detail. I'll decide how to use it. As I left his office, the city felt colder, harsher. People passed me on the street, laughing, living their lives, oblivious to the war being waged inside mine. I carried the weight of her past in my hands, but in my chest was something heavier, the knowledge that showing Daniel the truth might destroy him as much as her lies would. I walked on in silence, my footsteps echoing the vow forming in my heart. If it came down to hurting him to save him, then that's exactly what I would do. It was almost midnight when the knock came. I had been sitting in my study, the folder from Victor still spread across my desk, each page a scar on my son's future. The knock was soft at first, almost timid, but it carried an edge that told me who it was before I even opened the door. She stood there in a silk coat, her hair pinned perfectly despite the late hour, eyes glistening as if she had been crying, or practicing the look in a mirror. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice small, delicate. I let the silence hang for a moment before stepping aside. She slipped past me into the living room, her perfume trailing like smoke. She sat gracefully on the couch, folding her hands in her lap, the picture of contrition. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "What happened at the wedding? It got out of hand. I drank too much. I was overwhelmed, and I said things I shouldn't have. I humiliated you, and I'm ashamed of that." I studied her carefully. She spoke the words, but her eyes didn't match them. They glittered, not with shame, but with calculation. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to test the waters, to measure how broken I had been left after her little performance. "You hurt me," I said evenly, keeping my tone flat. "But hurting me isn't what worries me. What worries me is how you've hurt Daniel." At the mention of his name, her mask faltered for half a second, just a flicker before she composed herself again. "Daniel loves you. He does. But he also feels betrayed. You kept so much from him. Secrets about your money, your past. I think he needs stability now. He needs someone who can help manage things so he doesn't feel abandoned again." There it was, the hook hidden inside the honey. She wasn't apologizing, she was maneuvering. Her words were soft, but the meaning behind them was sharp. She wanted access, control, authority over the very empire I had built. "You think you can manage my life better than I can?" I asked quietly, watching her reaction. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think we can protect him together. But to do that, we need to make sure the finances, the businesses, the fortune are handled responsibly. You've done so much, but you're older now. Things could slip. Mistakes could happen." She smiled sweetly. "I'd never forgive myself if something happened to your legacy because you refused to accept help." I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. Her words were a blade wrapped in silk. She wanted guardianship without saying it outright. She wanted to hold the keys while my son stood in the dark, believing she was keeping him safe. I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. "Thank you for your apology," I said at last. "But my affairs are mine to handle, and Daniel is my son, not a prize to be managed." For the first time, her smile cracked, just a hairline fracture, but it was enough to tell me she had heard the steel in my voice, and she knew I wasn't going to fold easily. The night after her visit, I sat alone in my study, staring at the papers Victor had given me. Every instinct screamed to shove them in Daniel's hands, force him to see the truth, and tear the blindfold she had tied over his eyes. But I knew my son. If I came at her directly, he would see it as jealousy, as bitterness. He would choose her again. No, to save him, I couldn't fight her head on. I had to let her think she was winning. The next time she came over, she didn't even bother pretending it was about me. She breezed into the kitchen with her usual perfume cloud, acting like she owned the place. Daniel was at work, which made her bold. She poured herself a glass of my bourbon without asking, then sat across from me, legs crossed, smile painted on. "How are you feeling these days?" she asked, her tone honeyed but sharp underneath. "You've seemed forgetful lately, distracted. Daniel worries you now." I leaned back in my chair and let out a tired sigh, lowering my eyes like a man ashamed. "I suppose I do forget things now and then," I murmured. "Names, dates, numbers. Age does that to a man." Her eyes lit up, just for a flash, before she masked it with sympathy. "It happens to everyone," she said softly, almost too softly, "but it's nothing to be ashamed of. Maybe you just need someone to help keep things in order, someone you can trust." I nodded slowly, pretending to mull it over, my hand shaking slightly as I lifted my glass. The shake wasn't real, but she didn't know that. I saw her lean in, hungry, the way a vulture circles when it smells the weakness of prey. "You know, Daniel and we could help," she offered carefully. "You've worked so hard all your life. It's not fair for you to carry all that responsibility now. You could relax. Let us handle the paperwork, the accounts, the property. We'd make sure everything is safe." I let silence hang between us, sipping my drink, then let out a weary laugh. "I suppose it might be easier that way, but these things, they're complicated. Legal papers, signatures. I wouldn't know where to start." Her smile widened, full of false reassurance. "You don't have to. I could ask around, find someone who specializes in these matters. Maybe even draw up a simple power of attorney, just in case, to make things smoother." I forced my brow to furrow, as if the words confused me. "Power of attorney?" I repeated, letting it stumble off my tongue like it was foreign. Her hand brushed mine, a gesture that might have seemed tender to an outsider, but I felt the claws hidden inside it. "Don't worry about the details," she whispered. "I'll take care of everything." And in that moment, I knew my plan was working. She thought she saw an old man fading. What she didn't see was the trap tightening around her ankles. The morning after her little performance in my kitchen, I made a call of my own. Not to Daniel, not to confront her, but to Victor. He arrived that evening with a small black case that looked like it belonged to a traveling salesman. Inside were the tools I needed. Tiny cameras no bigger than shirt buttons, microphones disguised as pens, even a wall clock fitted with a hidden lens. He walked me through each one, his voice low and firm. "If she's going to try something, you need proof. Words won't save you with your son. Evidence will." Together we placed them carefully around the house, one in the lamp by the couch where she liked to sit, another above the kitchen doorway, a third in my study, angled toward my desk. When he left, the house felt the same on the surface, but now it was armed, watching, waiting. It didn't take long for her to test me again. She showed up the following week with a tone of false concern, her hands folded primly in front of her. "You haven't been yourself lately," she said, her voice dripping sympathy. "Daniel and I talked, and we think it's time you saw a doctor. Just a simple checkup." My gut twisted, but I forced my face into a mask of confusion. "A doctor? I feel fine." She smiled sweetly, too sweetly. "It's just precaution. The mind can slip without us realizing it. I know someone, a specialist. He's discreet, trustworthy. He's helped other families with situations like this." And there it was, the next step. Not just control of my finances, but control of my health, my competency. If she could get a doctor to declare me unstable, it would pave the way for her to claim guardianship. She wasn't just planning for my money, she was planning to erase my authority entirely. I nodded slowly, feigning reluctance. "If you think it's wise, maybe you're right. I have been forgetting things." I let my voice trail off, as though I'd lost my train of thought mid-sentence. Her eyes glittered with triumph. "I'll make the appointment. You won't have to worry about a thing." That night, I sat in my study, the cameras quietly recording the empty house, and I felt the weight of what was coming. She thought she was tightening the noose around my neck, but she didn't realize she was stepping into her own gallows. Every smile, every word, every manipulation, it was all being captured now. I pulled out Victor's folder once more, laying it beside my glass of bourbon. Her past was already a trail of ruin, but her present would be the final nail in her coffin, and this time she wouldn't be able to walk away clean. I whispered into the stillness of the room, my voice steady. You want a war? Then let's make it one worth remembering. The appointment came sooner than I expected. She drove me herself, her hand light on my arm as though she were a dutiful daughter instead of the wolf leading me to slaughter. Don't worry, she said sweetly as we pulled up to a narrow brick building tucked between an insurance office and a pawn shop. Dr. Larkin is wonderful. He's helped so many families. The building smelled of bleach and old carpet, the kind of place that tried too hard to look professional but couldn't hide the cracks. A receptionist barely looked up as she signed me in, her eyes flicking to my daughter-in-law with recognition that made my gut twist tighter. She had brought others here before, I thought. This wasn't her first performance. The doctor himself was a thin man with spectacles that slid down his nose and a voice too smooth, too rehearsed. He shook my hand lightly, his eyes not really on me, but on her, as though she were the client, not me. So, he began, Daniel's wife tells me you've been having some memory troubles. Forgetting dates? Misplacing things? I let my gaze drift to the window as if distracted. Sometimes I lose track, I mumbled, forcing a tremor into my voice. Names slip away. Words. He leaned forward, nodding sympathetically, but his pen scratched across the page with speed that betrayed his eagerness. That's quite common at your age. Have you ever found yourself confused about where you are? I let silence hang, then blinked slowly, as though piecing the question together. Where I am? I repeated, letting the words stumble out clumsily. His eyes lit up, and I knew I had given him exactly what he wanted. My daughter-in-law sat beside me, her hand brushing my arm like she was soothing me, though I felt the claws beneath her nails. See, this is what I was telling you, she said softly. It's getting worse. The doctor nodded, writing faster. Yes, I understand. I'll run a few simple assessments, nothing to worry about. For the next half hour, he asked questions meant to trip me up, simple math, short-term memory games. I intentionally faltered, mixing up numbers, pretending to lose track of words. His notes piled higher, each scribble a false testimony that I was slipping. But as he scribbled, I watched him carefully, every leading question, every glance at her for reassurance, every assumption he made without hesitation. My cameras at home would capture her excitement later, but here I captured something just as valuable, his complicity. By the end, he folded his hands together with a rehearsed look of concern. It might be wise to consider some support for him, someone to oversee finances, medical decisions, just until things stabilize. Her smile widened at those words, though she hid it quickly behind a mask of sorrow. We'll do whatever is best for him. I nodded weakly, playing my role, but inside my chest burned with steel. They thought they were building a case against me. What they didn't realize was that every word, every note, every lie was just more rope they were handing me to hang them with. 2 days after that sham of an appointment, I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was official, stamped with the logo of my brokerage firm. Inside was a polite but chilling notice. Due to recent medical concerns raised by a third-party physician, large withdrawals or transfers from my accounts would be subject to temporary review pending further documentation of my mental competency. I read it 3 times before the meaning truly sank in. The doctor had written them. He had taken my performance of confusion and turned it into a weapon. My accounts weren't locked completely, but they were shackled just enough to give her room to maneuver. She had managed to infiltrate the fortress I had spent decades building, and she had done it with a smile and a signature. That evening, she appeared at my door again, her expression carefully measured. I heard about the letter, she said, as if she had only just learned of it, though I knew she had orchestrated the entire move. Daniel and I are worried. This isn't good for you, managing all this stress. The firm is just trying to protect you. I set the paper down on the table between us, watching her eyes flick to it like a cat watching prey. Protect me? Or protect what you want from me? I asked quietly. She tilted her head, her features softening into false innocence. That's not fair. I'm only thinking of you. Imagine how much easier it would be if you didn't have to worry about these complicated things. You could relax, travel, enjoy life. Let us handle the rest. Her words were sugar-coated, but the poison underneath was strong enough to choke me. She wanted me to hand her the keys, and the frightening part was that on paper she already had leverage. The doctor's letter was a shadow over my name, and the firm wouldn't ignore it. I leaned back in my chair, letting my shoulders sag, playing the role she so desperately Wanted me to be. Maybe you're right, I murmured, forcing a tremor into my voice. It's all gotten overwhelming. Her smile widened, and for a split second her guard slipped. I saw the glint of triumph in her eyes, the hunger that had nothing to do with love or family. We'll take care of it, she whispered, as though promising comfort. Later, after she left, I sat in the dark with the letter still in my hand. My empire, my life's work, was no longer completely mine. But instead of fear, I felt a calm resolve settling over me. She thought she had tightened the noose. What she didn't know was that I had already begun pulling the trapdoor open beneath her. Every letter, every restriction, every sly word from her lips was no longer an attack against me. It was evidence. And evidence, when wielded correctly, can topple even the most careful predator. By the time the weekend arrived, I knew I had to act. The letter from the brokerage was still tucked inside my desk drawer, a silent reminder that she was winning ground inch by inch. If I waited too long, Daniel would be standing beside her when she finally tried to strip me of everything, so I decided to give her the illusion of victory and let her choke on it. I called Daniel first. My voice was warm, casual, the way it used to be when I invited him over for Sunday dinners. Son, why don't you and your wife come by tomorrow evening? I've been thinking. It's time I make things right. I want to give you both something to start your life together properly. There was hesitation in his tone, but her voice carried faintly in the background, urging him to agree. He did. I spent the next day preparing, not just the meal, but the stage. The cameras Victor had installed hummed silently from their hidden corners, their lenses angled perfectly toward the dining room table. I laid out the good china, polished the silver, even poured fine wine into crystal glasses. It wasn't for them, it was for the performance. When they arrived, Daniel looked wary, but she walked in glowing, her smile so wide it nearly split her face. She kissed my cheek lightly, like an actress stepping into her role. "This is so thoughtful of you," she said. Dinner began pleasantly enough. I kept my voice soft, my hands trembling just slightly as I lifted my fork. I played the part of a weary man, worn down, ready to unburden himself, and after the plates were cleared, I leaned back and sighed heavily. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, letting my words falter, as though it took effort to string them together. "You two are starting your lives together, and I've held too tightly to things. I want to change that." I looked at Daniel, then at her. "I want to give you a wedding gift, something substantial." Her eyes flickered, a spark of greed igniting before she hid it behind a mask of humility. "That's not necessary," she said quickly, though her hand tightened on Daniel's arm. I nodded. "It is necessary. I've spoken with the brokerage. There are some accounts I can transfer. But it's complicated. Papers need signing. Power of attorney might be the simplest way. Just to avoid delays." Her breath hitched. It was so faint most would have missed it, but I saw it. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with false care. "That might be wise. It would protect you too, if anything unexpected happened." Daniel frowned slightly, shifting in his seat. "Power of attorney? Isn't that a lot?" She turned to him, her voice soft but persuasive. "It's just precaution, sweetheart. It makes everything smoother." I kept my expression blank, though inside, satisfaction burned hot. Every word, every glance was being recorded. She thought she was luring me into a cage. She didn't realize she was stepping into one herself. The following morning, I drove across town with the memory card from the dining room camera tucked safely in my pocket. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized, knuckles pale against the leather. Every mile closer to Victor's office, my heart thudded heavier, not from fear, but from the certainty that last night had given me exactly what I needed. Victor was waiting for me when I arrived, his desk cluttered as always, a half-empty mug of coffee steaming between stacks of files. I handed him the memory card without a word. He slid it into his laptop, leaned back, and let the recording play. We both sat in silence as her voice filled the room, honeyed and poisonous all at once. "Power of attorney might be the simplest way. It would protect you too." Daniel's uncertain reply. Her careful persuasion. My feigned confusion. It was all there, captured with clarity that no one could deny. When the recording ended, Victor exhaled slowly. "She's not just manipulative. She's building a case to take you down. And with that doctor's letter, she's already laid the foundation. If you hadn't played along, she'd have you boxed in within weeks." "I know," I muttered, staring at the frozen image of her smile on his screen. That's why I need more than just you, Victor. I need someone who can put her where she belongs, legally. Someone who won't look the other way when they see the trail she's leaving. Victor studied me for a long moment before nodding. He opened a drawer, pulled out a plain black business card, and slid it across the desk. The name printed there was simple: Agent Thomas Reed. Beneath it, no title, no flashy insignia, just a phone number. He works with financial crimes, Victor explained. Wire fraud, exploitation, guardianship scams. He's taken down people like her before, but you need to be sure, Hale. Once you bring him in, there's no halfway. It becomes official. I picked up the card, turning it between my fingers. She's already made it official. She went to a doctor. She sent letters to my brokerage. She's not stopping. If I don't fight back now, I'll lose everything, my son included. Victor nodded grimly. Then call him, and be ready. That night I sat in my study with the card on the desk before me. I poured a glass of bourbon, staring at the name like it was a key to a locked door. Calling him meant escalation. It meant a war that would spill beyond family arguments and into courtrooms, headlines, maybe even prison walls. But when I closed my yes, I saw Daniel's face at the cafe, twisted with anger that wasn't his own. I saw his hand wrapped tightly in hers, his future hanging by a thread she controlled. I picked up the phone. My voice was steady as I dialed. Agent Reed, my name is Jonathan Hale. I think you'll want to hear what I have. And just like that, the war moved from shadows into daylight. It didn't take long for her to sense that I wasn't folding as easily as she expected. When manipulation failed, she tried something louder, something meant to rattle me publicly. 2 weeks after that dinner, a sharp knock rattled my front door at 9 in the evening. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing on the porch, their hands resting near their belts, expressions carefully neutral. "Mr. Hale?" one asked. "We've had a wellness call placed for you. A family member is concerned about your ability to care for yourself." The words dripped with false concern, but I could practically hear her voice behind them. Of course it was her. Daniel's wife playing her next move, trying to brand me incompetent in the eyes of the law. I stepped aside and gestured them in. "Please, come in. You'll find I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." They entered cautiously, scanning the living room, the tidy shelves, the neat arrangement of books and framed photos. I had made sure everything was in order, no misplaced papers, no half-empty bottles, no signs of confusion. I guided them to the kitchen, where dinner was still warm on the stove, and offered them coffee. The taller officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" "Not at all," I said calmly, taking a seat at the table. They asked about my age, my daily routines, whether I had any medical issues. I answered each one clearly, with dates, times, even details about current events, just to leave no doubt. I could see the officer's posture easing, the initial suspicion giving way to quiet respect. Finally, the shorter officer closed his notebook. "Honestly, sir, you seem sharper than half the people who call us themselves. Whoever placed this call, well, it doesn't line up with what we see here." I smiled faintly, though inside my chest burned with rage. "I appreciate you coming, truly. Better safe than sorry, isn't that what they say?" They nodded, thanked me for my time, and left. I stood at the window watching their cruiser pull away, the red and blue lights flashing briefly against the trees. The moment the house was quiet again, I sat down heavily in my chair. I wanted to smash something, to roar at the walls until the echoes shook her name out of the air, but instead I forced myself to breathe. Her game was transparent, and she had just made a mistake. She had left fingerprints on this move, fingerprints that would matter when Reed built the case. I picked up the phone and called Victor. "She sent the police," I said flatly. "A wellness check." He let out a low whistle. "That's good." "Good?" I snapped. "Yes," he said. "Because now it's not just about family squabbles. Now there's a record. Every false move she makes strengthens our hand. Let her keep playing." And I realized he was right. She thought she was tightening her grip. In truth, she was digging her own grave, one report at a time. It was Agent Reed's idea to shift the stage. "Keep her out of your house," he told me, his voice steady over the phone. "Make her comfortable in a public space where she thinks she's in control. People like her perform best with an audience, even if they don't know they have one." So I called Daniel and suggested dinner. I picked a quiet Italian restaurant on the edge of town, the kind with red-checkered tablecloths, dim lighting, and a discreet back room where Reed's team could blend in as ordinary diners. Daniel hesitated, but she jumped at the invitation. Of course she did. Public places gave her confidence. She thought no one would suspect her of scheming over pasta and wine. When we arrived, I greeted them warmly, even clasping her hand with a frail smile. "I've been thinking," I said as we sat, my tone slow and deliberate. "I've made mistakes. I haven't always been the father Daniel needed me to be, but I'd like to change that. I'd like to give you both something meaningful while I still can." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, betraying the hunger she carried under her painted smile. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with sweetness. "That's very generous, Mr. Hale, but you shouldn't rush. We want you healthy and happy for years." I let out a weary laugh, playing my role perfectly. Health doesn't last forever. I know that better than most, and the brokerage won't release funds easily these days, not without someone to help manage them. Perhaps power of attorney really is the way. I paused, feigning confusion, as though the words themselves weighed heavy on my tongue. "Would you know how to arrange that?" Her fork clinked softly against her plate. She straightened, careful not to appear too eager, but the sparkle in her eyes betrayed her. "Of course," she murmured. "It's just paperwork. I could have a draft ready within a week. It would protect you, and it would give Daniel peace of mind." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around his glass of wine. "Dad, maybe we should slow down." But she cut him off gently, her hand resting on his arm. "It's just precaution, love. Nothing changes day to day. It's only for emergencies." I nodded slowly, letting a tired smile spread across my face. "That sounds wise." From the corner of my eye, I saw Reed's team watching quietly, one of them pretending to sip soup while a small recorder nestled in his jacket. Every word she spoke was being captured, every manipulation etched into evidence that would soon bury her. When the meal ended, I shook Daniel's hand firmly, holding his gaze. For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw doubt in his eyes, as though some part of him questioned the script she had written for him. As they left, she turned back to me with that same sugary smile. "Don't worry, Mr. Hale. I'll take care of everything." And I knew then she had no idea she had just written her own confession, served neatly between breadsticks and wine. Back at my house, I sat in my study long after the restaurant's warmth had faded from my clothes. The folder from Victor lay open beside the small black recorder Reed had handed me earlier that night. He had already promised a copy would be sealed and logged, but I kept the original close, as if holding it made the victory more real. I replayed her words in my head. "I'll take care of everything." She thought it was reassurance. To me, it was her signature on a confession she didn't know she was giving. Victor dropped by the next morning, his eyes sharper than usual. He tossed a fresh stack of documents onto the desk. Records from her last marriage, bank transfers that aligned suspiciously with vacations she had taken, property titles that shifted names just before bankruptcies. Each page added weight to the case, layering her history of deceit like bricks on a wall that would soon collapse on top of her. "This is enough to paint a pattern," Victor said. "1 or 2 coincidences could be dismissed, but 4, 5, it's a trail." Reed arrived later, quiet, professional, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than he was. He spread the evidence across my table like pieces of a puzzle: photos, transcripts, statements, bank slips, and now the recording from the restaurant. His fingers tapped the paper rhythmically as he arranged them. "We're getting close," he said finally. "What we need now is escalation. She'll push harder, and when she does, we'll have her cornered. Guardianship petitions, fraudulent documents, financial coercion, these are crimes when you put them together. She won't just lose your son. She'll face charges." The thought should have comforted me, but as I sat there watching him tuck the evidence neatly back into his case, my chest felt heavy. I wanted justice. I wanted her stripped of the mask she wore so smugly. But all of this came at a cost. Every page that condemned her was also a page that would cut Daniel open. He loved her. He believed her. And when the truth came crashing down, he would be standing in the rubble, unsure which pieces of his life were ever real. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. When it all breaks, he's going to hate me. He'll see me as the executioner, not her jailer. Reed's expression softened for the first time since we met. "Better he hates you and lives free than loves her and lives destroyed." The words sat heavy between us, but they were true. I had sacrificed my body, my time, my peace for Daniel when he was a boy. This was no different. If I had to sacrifice his love to save his life, then that was the path I would take. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stared out the window into the darkness. The evidence was growing, the net was tightening, and I was closer than ever to vindication. But the closer I got, the more I realized that justice wouldn't heal everything. It would wound before it mended, burn before it purified. And the hardest part was knowing the fire would reach my son first. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee by the window when the knock came, firm and deliberate. When I opened the door, a man in a suit stood there, briefcase in hand, papers tucked under his arm. His expression was professional, but there was no mistaking the edge of discomfort in his eyes. "Mr. Hale?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a packet thick with documents. "You've been served. Petition for emergency guardianship hearing, filed by your daughter-in-law on behalf of your son." The words struck harder than any physical blow. I closed the door after he left, the papers heavy in my hands, my chest hollow. I sat at the table and read. Each page was a carefully constructed lie. Claims of my supposed confusion, references to the doctor's evaluation, mention of the brokerage letter. Her fingerprints were all over it, but she had been clever, painting herself as the dutiful protector, the wife trying to shield the family from an aging man losing his grip. For a moment, I let my head fall into my hands. She had escalated faster than I expected, and now the war wasn't just whispers, visits, or staged concern. It was moving into the courts, into the hands of judges and clerks who didn't know me, who would weigh evidence without the weight of love or history. I called Victor first. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady. I figured this was coming. "Don't panic. We've got what we need." Next I called Reed. He listened quietly as I explained, his tone measured when he finally spoke. "This is her overreach. Exactly what we were waiting for. A guardianship petition means discovery, which means her lies will be tested under oath. Trust me, this is good." Good. The word didn't fit in my mouth. There was nothing good about the thought of standing across a courtroom from my son, of watching him defend the woman who was trying to erase me. Nothing good about the possibility that he would look at me with the same contempt she did. But I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the truth. We had recordings. We had documents. We had her pattern of destruction, stretching back years. She might think she had written the script, but the ending was mine to decide. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the petition spread before me. The language was sterile, clinical, words like diminished capacity, best interests, urgent protection. But underneath it all, I could hear her voice whispering, sweet and venomous. "Sign it all over to me. Let me take care of everything." I poured myself a glass of bourbon and stared at the papers until the letters blurred. She had drawn the battle lines in ink and law. Fine. If she wanted a war in court, then court would be where her mask came off. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Because in a courtroom, lies don't just hurt. Lies can collapse under their own weight. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and paper, the kind of scent that clung to places where lives were quietly rewritten. I sat at the long oak table with Reed and Victor flanking me, the petition laid out in neat stacks before the judge. Across the aisle she sat beside Daniel, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes brimming with feigned concern. She looked like an angel of mercy to anyone who didn't know better. To me, she was a wolf in silk. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, called the case to order. My daughter-in-law's attorney stood first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, this is an urgent matter. Mr. Hale has displayed increasing signs of confusion and cognitive decline. He has forgotten names, dates, and conversations. His own physician has noted the deterioration. For the sake of his financial and personal well-being, guardianship is necessary." Every word was carefully chosen, stacked like bricks to build a prison around me. Dan. Yale sat stiffly beside her, his gaze fixed on the table. He didn't look at me once. When it was her turn to speak, she leaned forward, her voice trembling just enough to sound genuine. "I love my father-in-law. I only want to protect him. He raised Daniel alone, and we owe him everything. But he's not the man he once was. He's vulnerable, and people could take advantage of him. I can't stand by and watch that happen." The performance was flawless. Her eyes even glistened as though she might cry. A few spectators nodded sympathetically. She was playing her role perfectly, and for a moment I wondered if even the judge was swayed. Then Reed stood. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind that made the room lean in to listen. "Your Honor, we respect the court's concern for Mr. Hale's welfare. But the claims made here are not only exaggerated, they are strategic. This is not about care. This is about control." He clicked a small remote. and the screen beside the judge flickered to life. The video played. The dinner at my house, her words caught in crystal clarity. Power of attorney might be the simplest way. It would protect you too. The room was silent, except for her own voice betraying her. Her face went pale. She tried to recover quickly, whispering something to her lawyer, but the damage was done. Reed let the silence hang before continuing. This is not the voice of a concerned daughter-in-law. This is coercion. This is financial exploitation, wrapped in the language of care. The judge's eyes narrowed, shifting from her to me, then back again. For the first time since the hearing began, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. I sat perfectly still, my face calm, my hands folded, but inside, I burned with a mix of vindication and sorrow. The lies were beginning to crack, but so too was my son's world. Every word exposed her, but each one also dragged him closer to the truth he didn't want to face. And I knew this was only the beginning. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath her chin, her sharp eyes fixed on my daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Hale," she said evenly, "in that recording, you suggest that power of attorney would be the simplest way to handle your father-in-law's finances. Was that your idea?" For a split second, she froze, her polished smile faltering. Then she forced a laugh, light and airy. "Of course not, Your Honor. That was taken out of context. I was simply responding to Mr. Hale's confusion. He brought it up first. I was trying to reassure him." Reed stood smoothly, his gaze steady. "With respect, Your Honor, the recording speaks for itself, and we have more." He clicked the remote again. Another clip played, this one from the restaurant, her voice again, lilting with sweetness. "I'll take care of everything." The judge's eyes sharpened further. "Mrs. Hale, that doesn't sound like reassurance. That sounds like intent." Color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, urging silence. I watched her jaw tighten, fury simmering beneath the surface of her carefully painted mask. Daniel shifted in his chair, finally daring to look at me. His eyes were clouded, confused, searching. For a moment I thought I saw the boy he once was, the boy who looked to me for answers, who trusted me without question. But then he turned back to her, clinging to the only narrative she had given him, even as it cracked around the edges. The judge turned to Reed. "What else do you have?" Reed's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Bank records, Your Honor. Documents tying Mrs. Hale to 3 prior marriages, each ending with unexplained financial transfers or bankruptcies, and sworn testimony from a notary public confirming that she sought power of attorney documents in Mr. Hale's name without his knowledge." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My daughter-in-law's fingers dug into Daniel's arm, her nails pressing crescents into his skin. He winced, but he didn't pull away. My heart ached watching it. He was torn in two, standing in a storm he didn't create. The judge tapped her gavel lightly, silencing the whispers. "I see," she said firmly. "Mrs. Hale, this court does not take lightly to petitions for guardianship, particularly when evidence suggests ulterior motives. I will review all materials before making a ruling, but let me be clear. Any attempt to exploit a vulnerable person for financial gain will not be tolerated." My daughter-in-law lowered her head, masking her face as though in shame, but I saw the flash in her eyes, rage, raw and uncontained. She hadn't expected the walls to close in so quickly. I sat still, my hands clasped, my expression unreadable. But inside, my resolve hardened even further. The courtroom wasn't the end. It was only another battlefield. And though she was cornered, I knew she would strike back with everything she had left. And I knew Daniel's heart was the weapon she would use next. After the hearing adjourned, I thought perhaps she would retreat, lick her wounds, and wait for another opening. But I underestimated her desperation. Within days, Daniel showed up at my door with his phone in hand, his expression hard to read, part anger, part confusion, part something I couldn't name. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "I need to show you something." He held out the phone, and there she was, my daughter-in-law, standing in my living room. The video had been taken during one of her visits, clearly without my knowledge. In it, I sat slouched in my chair, rubbing my temples, letting my words trail off into silence, the way I had learned to do when I pretended confusion. She spoke softly from behind the camera, her voice dripping with pity. "See how he struggles? He loses his thoughts. He doesn't even notice I'm here. This is why we're worried." Daniel's eyes were sharp as he looked at me. "This is what she's been dealing with. How do you explain that?" I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment hang. She filmed me without my knowledge, Daniel. Doesn't that tell you something about her intentions? He hesitated, but I saw the doubt creeping in. She had planted it so carefully, watering it with every staged video, every whispered lie. He wanted to believe her, because believing me meant admitting he had been wrong about the woman he loved. Son, I said quietly, you know me. You've known me your whole life. Do you really believe I can't finish a sentence? That I don't recognize my own house? Or do you believe the woman who just happens to profit? If you think I've lost my mind? He flinched, his grip tightening around the phone. She says you're dangerous to yourself. That if you make a mistake, it could ruin everything. She's just trying to protect you. I let out a slow breath. Protect me? Or protect herself? Did she tell you she's been married 3 times before? Did she tell you each husband lost everything after she left? Did she tell you about the properties, the bank accounts, the transfers? His face paled. That's not true. It is, I said, my voice firm. And soon you'll see the proof in court. But son, when that day comes, it won't just be her on trial. It'll be your faith in her, and I know that's going to hurt. He stood there, silent, torn apart by the chasm opening between us. Finally he muttered, I don't know who to believe, and turned toward the door. I watched him leave, the sound of it echoing through the house like a verdict. She wasn't giving up. She was escalating, turning his heart into a weapon against me. But I wasn't done either. The cameras had caught her every move, and soon her staged pity would be exposed for what it really was, calculated cruelty. The letter from the brokerage arrived at the end of the week, summoning me for a meeting. The language was polite, but I could read between the lines. They weren't inviting me, they were investigating me. My daughter-in-law's hand was all over it. She wanted them to see me as frail, confused, a liability in control of too much money. I wore my best suit that morning, the one I hadn't taken out of the closet in years. Crisp white shirt, dark tie, polished shoes. When I stepped into the lobby of the brokerage, heads turned. Not because of wealth, though they knew who I was now, but because I carried myself with the authority of a man who had built everything with his own hands. There was no tremor in my stride, no haze in my eyes. In the conference room, 3 officials sat waiting. One cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. We've received concerns regarding your ability to manage your accounts. Given the seriousness of your holdings, we're obligated to ensure everything is in order. I gave a measured nod. And by concerns, you mean the ones raised by my daughter-in-law. They shifted uncomfortably, but no one denied it. I see. I folded my hands on the table and leaned forward. Gentlemen, let me make this perfectly clear. I built my portfolio from the ground up. Every investment, every contract, every calculated risk, I made those decisions, not with confusion, but with clarity. And if you need proof, I'll recite to you the last 5 major moves I made, the numbers involved, and the current returns. Shall I? Before they could answer, I listed them, company names, share percentages, growth margins, down to the decimals. My voice was steady, unwavering. When I finished, silence filled the room. Does that sound like a man who's lost his grip? I asked. The oldest of the 3 officials cleared his throat again. No, sir, it does not. Good. I straightened my tie. Because what you're dealing with here isn't a confused old man. You're dealing with a predator in my family who sees dollar signs where she should see loyalty. She's building a narrative, and she's using your institution to validate it. I suggest you tread carefully before allowing yourselves to become complicit. The weight of my words settled heavily over the room. Finally, the lead official nodded. We'll take that into account. Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Hale. As I walked out of the building, the sun sharp against the pavement, I felt the smallest flicker of victory. She had tried to weaponize my wealth against me, but today I had turned the blade back toward her. Later, I called Reed. They're starting to see through it, I told him. Good, he replied. Every time you stand strong in front of them, her lies weaken. Let her keep pushing. The more she presses, the more obvious it becomes. And for the first time in weeks, I felt not just defiance, but momentum. She wasn't just losing ground, she was exposing herself with every desperate move. A week after the brokerage meeting, Reed called me into his office. His tone was sharper than usual, tinged with something close to satisfaction. We've got a witness, he said simply, and he gestured to the man sitting across from him. The man was middle-aged, thin hair combed carefully back, his hands folded nervously on the table. A small notary's seal rested on the folder in front of him. Mr. Hale, he began, clearing his throat. "My name's Alan Pierce. I've notarized documents in this county for over 20 years, and recently your daughter-in-law came to me." My chest tightened, but I stayed silent, letting him continue. "She brought in a power of attorney form with your name on it. Already filled out, already signed. At least that's what she wanted me to believe. But the signature—" He shook his head. "It didn't look right. I've seen thousands of signatures. I told her I couldn't notarize it unless you were present. She insisted you were too unwell to come in, said it was urgent. Rage burned in my gut, but I forced my face to remain calm." Alan continued, voice steadier now. "I refused. I told her I'd lose my license if I touched it. She left angry, but not before slipping. She said, 'He won't even know the difference. He won't remember tomorrow anyway.' That's when I realized she was trying to pull something bigger than just a favor." Reed leaned forward, sliding a document across the table. It was a sworn affidavit, already signed and sealed by Alan. "This," Reed said, "is another nail in her coffin. Forgery, attempted fraud, intent to deceive, all tied to financial exploitation. With your permission, we'll submit it to the court." I nodded slowly, my hands tightening into fists beneath the table. "Do it. Every piece of her deception needs to be on record." Alan glanced at me, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I should have come forward sooner. I just didn't want to get dragged into family business. But once I saw the headlines about the hearing, I knew I couldn't stay quiet." I placed a hand on the table, steady and firm. "You did the right thing, and your courage will protect more than just me. It will protect my son from her too." When Alan left, Reed leaned back in his chair, satisfaction etched into his expression. "She's running out of room. Every desperate move she makes is another charge we can add. She thinks she's clever, but the trail she's leaving is enough to bury her." I left Reed's office with the affidavit tucked securely in my briefcase, the weight of it both heavy and liberating. She had tried to steal my name, my identity, my legacy, but instead she had given me the proof I needed to end her charade. And as I drove home, I whispered the words that had carried me through every battle in my life. Not yet, not done, not beaten. The courthouse was colder the second time, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Everyone could feel it, the tension, the weight of truth pressing down on the room. My daughter-in-law sat at the petitioner's table, her posture rigid, her smile brittle, the mask she had worn so easily before now showing cracks. Daniel sat beside her again, but this time he looked less certain, his eyes darting between me and the judge, searching for something solid to hold on to. Reed stood confidently, a folder of documents in his hand. "Your Honor, since the last hearing, additional evidence has come to light, evidence that directly challenges the credibility of the petitioner." He called the first witness, Alan Pierce, the notary. Alan stepped up nervously, but his voice grew steadier with each word. He told the court how she had come to him with a power of attorney form, already filled out and bearing what she claimed was my signature, how he had refused to notarize it, how she had insisted I was too unwell to appear. And finally, how she had slipped and revealed her true intent. "He won't even know the difference. He won't remember tomorrow anyway." The words echoed in the courtroom like a hammer striking stone. Her attorney objected, tried to paint it as hearsay, but Reed countered smoothly. "The affidavit is sworn and notarized, and Mr. Pierce's testimony is direct. This isn't hearsay. This is fraud." The judge's expression hardened, her gaze cutting across the room to my daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Hale, do you deny approaching this notary with such a document?" For the first time her voice wavered. I may have misunderstood the requirements. It wasn't fraud, Your Honor. It was concern. I thought it would be easier for him." Reed stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Easier for whom? For the man who supposedly couldn't remember his own name? Or for you, who stood to gain control of millions overnight?" She flushed, gripping Daniel's hand tighter, but his face betrayed him. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed, as if a storm was breaking inside him. Reed wasn't finished. He produced bank records showing her history, patterns of transfers, debts erased after marriages, assets shifted under new names. He laid them out in neat piles before the judge, each one a stone in the wall closing in around her. When he was done, the judge exhaled slowly, her tone clipped and firm. "The allegations of incompetency raised against Mr. Hale are, at this stage, unsubstantiated. What is substantiated are serious questions regarding the petitioner's credibility and intent. This court will not rubber stamp a guardianship when there is evidence of potential exploitation. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My daughter-in-law sat frozen, her smile gone, her grip on Daniel's hand trembling. I remained silent, my face calm, but inside my chest a storm of vindication raged. The walls she had tried to build around me were collapsing, brick by brick, on her own head. And as I glanced at Daniel, I saw the doubt growing clearer in his eyes. The seed of truth had been planted. Now it was only a matter of time. Me before it shattered the illusion she had spun around him. When the hearing recessed for the day, the courthouse hall buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled notes, lawyers spoke in low clusters, and curious onlookers exchanged glances that said more than words could. I stood near the steps, my hands clasped behind my back, waiting for Reed to finish a quiet conversation with Victor. That's when I saw Daniel. He lingered at the far end of the hall, his tie loosened, his face pale, his eyes restless. She was at his side, her hand gripping his arm like an anchor she refused to release. She whispered urgently in his ear, her voice too low for me to hear, but her posture betrayed her. Desperation. She wasn't smiling anymore. Daniel's gaze lifted and locked on mine. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us, the father and son who had once been inseparable, now divided by a storm neither of us had chosen. His steps faltered as though he wanted to come closer, but her grip tightened, holding him in place. I walked toward them, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes widened with fury, but she kept her mask intact, turning her expression into something almost pitying for the audience watching. "Daniel," I said softly when I reached him, "I know this is tearing you apart. I know what it feels like to be caught between loyalty and truth." He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "Dad, she says you're twisting everything, that you've always hated her, that you'll do anything to drive us apart." I glanced at her, her jaw tight, her eyes narrowed like a predator caught in a trap. Then I looked back at my son. "Son, listen to me. Every man she's been with has lost everything. This isn't opinion, it's fact. You saw the bank records, the testimonies. You think I wanted to drag this into court? I'd burn every dollar I've made if it meant keeping you safe. But I won't let you walk blindfolded into the same ruin she's left for others." His face twisted, torn in two. "She loves me," he whispered, almost pleading. "She's been there when you weren't." The words stabbed deep, but I didn't flinch. Maybe I wasn't there enough. Maybe I failed you in ways I can't undo. But love doesn't forge signatures. Love doesn't drain accounts. Love doesn't lie under oath. Look at her, Daniel, not at her words. Look at her eyes. Ask yourself if that's the look of a woman who loves you, or a woman afraid of losing control. He turned then, really looked at her. For the first time she faltered under his gaze, her composure cracking. She tried to smile, to whisper something soothing, but her voice caught, brittle, thin. Daniel pulled his arm free. He didn't move toward me, not yet, but he took a single step away from her, and that was enough. The seed of doubt had sprouted into something larger, something she couldn't smother. I didn't press further. I simply nodded once, then walked past them, leaving the silence heavy in my wake. Because sometimes the quiet truth speaks louder than any argument. The courtroom was packed tighter than before, every bench filled, the air charged with anticipation. Word had spread about the petition, the accusations, the cracks beginning to show. Reporters lingered in the back rows, pens ready, eyes sharp. I sat at the defense table, my heart steady but heavy. Today would be the turning point. Reed rose first, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, we would like to submit further recordings into evidence. These were captured in Mr. Hale's home and in public settings with the petitioner present. They demonstrate intent, coercion, and exploitation." The judge gave a curt nod. "Proceed." The first video filled the monitor. My living room, her perched on the couch, her voice soft but unmistakably manipulative. "You've seemed forgetful lately. Maybe it's time you let us manage things. Power of attorney would make it so much easier." Gasps echoed through the room. The second clip rolled. The restaurant, my voice tired, uncertain, her reply dripping with false care. "Don't worry, Mr. Hale. I'll take care of everything." The third was the sharpest dagger of all. She thought the cameras were off that night in my study, but Victor had placed one there, her voice low, muttering into her phone. "He's almost there. A few more weeks, and Daniel and I will have full control. He won't even realize what he signed." The silence afterward was absolute. Even the air seemed to pause. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Hale, would you care to explain these recordings?" Her face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "They're out of context," she stammered. "He's twisting everything. He's set me up. This is entrapment." Her attorney rose, but the words died in his throat when the judge lifted a hand. "Sit down," she said sharply. "I've heard enough." I didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't let my triumph show. My gaze was fixed on Daniel. His face was ashen, his eyes wide, his lips parted like the ground had just split open beneath him. He looked at her, at me, then back at the screen as if hoping the images would change, as if praying it wasn't real. She turned to him in desperation, grabbing his hand. "Daniel, you know me. You know I'd never—" But he pulled his hand away, slowly, deliberately. His chest heaved, his jaw clenched, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. "You lied to me. All this time. You lied." The mask slipped completely then. She leaned forward, her voice breaking into a snarl only he could hear. "You'd have nothing without me." But the microphones caught it, and the entire courtroom heard. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order, but it was too late. The truth was laid bare. The woman who had paraded as protector, as wife, as daughter-in-law, had exposed herself as exactly what she was: a predator. And Daniel, my son, finally saw it with his own eyes. The gavel struck again, sharp against the wood, but her voice rose louder, cracking like glass under pressure. "This is all lies," she screamed, her mask fully gone. "He set me up. He's been manipulating everything from the start. You don't know him like I do. He's not some innocent old man. He's a monster who abandoned his son." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, people craning their necks, whispering, scribbling notes. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. She didn't care anymore. Her polished act was shattered, and what poured out now was raw, frantic rage. She turned on Daniel, grabbing at his sleeve, her eyes wild. Tell them how much I've done for you. How I've been the only one who believed in you, who loved you when he was never there." Daniel jerked his arm free, his face pale and stricken. "Stop." "P," he said hoarsely. "Just stop." Tears streaked her carefully painted face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of fury, of a cornered animal realizing the cage had slammed shut. She pointed across the aisle at me, her voice shrill. "He's poisoned you against me, Daniel. Can't you see? This was his plan all along, to turn you against your own wife." But Daniel's eyes, my son's eyes, were no longer clouded. They were sharp, wounded, and filled with the dawning horror of truth. His voice broke, but his words were steady. "You forged his name. You tried to steal his life. And you lied to me. Every single day." Her body sagged as though the strength had drained from her. "I did it for us," she whispered, desperate now. "For our future. You don't understand. We could have had everything." Daniel shook his head, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "I don't want everything. I just wanted the truth, and you couldn't give me that." She let out a guttural sound, half sob, half snarl, and lunged toward me across the aisle. For a heartbeat, the room froze, shocked by the sudden motion, but the bailiffs caught her before she reached me. She fought against their grip, her screams echoing against the marble walls. "You'll regret this. Both of you. I'll destroy you." The judge slammed the gavel, her voice ringing out like thunder. "Order! Order! Mrs. Hale, you will sit down and remain silent, or you will be held in contempt." The bailiffs forced her back into her chair, but the damage was done. Her mask was gone, her performance obliterated. What remained was the predator stripped bare for the world to see. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders trembling. He wasn't crying, not yet, but the silence around him spoke louder than tears. His world had cracked open, and he was standing amid the rubble, realizing that the woman he had chosen over his father was nothing more than a lie. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close like I had when he was a boy, but I stayed still, my heart heavy with both sorrow and resolve. Some bridges could not be rebuilt in a single day. Some wounds needed time to bleed before they could heal. All I could do was sit, watching as the court prepared to finish what she had started, and what I had vowed to end. The judge wasted no time. After her outburst, after the recordings, after the testimony, there was no air left in her defense. "This court will not tolerate such conduct," she declared, her gavel striking like thunder. "Mrs. Hale, You are hereby remanded into custody pending further charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation. The bailiffs moved swiftly. She thrashed against their grip, her voice shrieking through the chamber. Daniel, don't let them do this. You know me. You know I did this for us. Her words bounced off the walls, hollow now, stripped of their power. Daniel didn't move. He didn't even look at her. His hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white, his head bowed as though the weight of her betrayal had finally crushed him. Cameras flashed as reporters spilled out into the hall, their voices rising like a storm. Billionaire father targeted by daughter-in-law. Fraud ring uncovered in courtroom. Questions flew, about me, about her, about Daniel, but I walked past them in silence, my face calm, my steps measured. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky heavy with clouds. A swarm of microphones thrust toward me, eager for a statement. Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say about the allegations? About your daughter-in-law's arrest? I stopped for only a moment, looking at the sea of faces, the lenses and lights. My throat ached with everything I could have said, about betrayal, about greed, about the cost of love, but I chose only 3 words. The truth matters. Then I walked on, leaving the clamor behind. That night, I sat alone in my study, the house too quiet, the bourbon untouched. On the television, every channel carried her face, once painted with charm, now smeared with fury as she was led away in handcuffs. Commentators speculated, analysts debated, strangers dissected our lives as though they were theater. I turned the screen off. The noise of the world wasn't what I needed. What I needed was silence, the kind that lets a man think about the price of survival. Because though she was gone, though her mask had shattered in front of everyone, the wreckage she left behind wasn't so easily cleared. Daniel's heart was broken, his trust in ruins, and I knew my silence in court, my calm restraint, had saved me, but it hadn't saved him. He would need time to grieve, not for her, but for the illusion she had spun around him. As the night deepened, I stood by the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. My reflection stared back at me, older, scarred, but unbroken. She had tried to destroy me. Instead, she had revealed me for what I was, a father who would stand in the fire if it meant pulling his son from the flames. And while the world debated the story, while her name filled the headlines, I whispered into the quiet what she had never understood. Dignity doesn't shout. Dignity endures. It was late when the knock came, softer than usual, hesitant. For a moment, I thought it was a neighbor, or perhaps Victor checking in. But when I opened the door, Daniel stood there. His shoulders slumped, his tie askew, his eyes swollen as though he hadn't slept. "Dad," he said quietly, almost a whisper. I stepped aside, and he walked in without waiting for an invitation. He stood in the living room, staring at the floor, like a boy caught between confession and denial. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Finally, he looked up, his voice raw. "I don't know what to say. Everything feels like a lie. She swore she loved me. She swore she was protecting us. And I believed her. I defended her against you, against everyone. And now—" His voice cracked. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Now I don't know who I am without her." I sat down across from him, giving him space. "You're still my son," I said softly. "That's who you are. That hasn't changed." He shook his head. "But I chose her over you. I sided with her when you were only trying to protect me. I let her turn me against my own father." His hands dropped, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. How do I come back from that? My chest ached, but I forced my voice steady. By understanding this, love makes fools of us all. You wanted to. Believe her because you wanted to believe in love. That's not weakness, Daniel. That's being human. What matters is what you do with the truth now that you've seen it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. I keep hearing her voice in my head, telling me you were the enemy, telling me you never cared. And I believed her. God, I believed her. He looked back at me, his eyes desperate. Did I ruin everything between us? I shook my head slowly. No, you can't ruin something I've built my whole life. I sacrificed, I bled, I carried every burden with one thought in my heart, that you'd have a chance at life better than mine. You're my son. That doesn't end because of her lies. His lips trembled, but he nodded, the weight of shame still pressing down on him. I'm sorry, Dad, for doubting you, for letting her come between us." I leaned forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure no one ever comes between us again." For the first time in months, I saw it, the faintest flicker of the boy I once knew, the boy who used to trust me without question. His shoulders eased, his eyes softened, and though the scars between us would take time to heal, the bridge had begun to rebuild. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just won a battle in court. I had won back my son. It was 3 days after the courtroom explosion when the call came. I was in the study, sorting through old files I hadn't touched in years, when the house phone rang. Hardly anyone used it anymore, which already made me wary. I picked it up, my voice steady. "Jonathan Hale?" There was a pause. Then her voice, raw and trembling, filtered through the line. "It's me." I almost hung up right there, but something in her tone, less polished, more frantic, stayed my hand. "You shouldn't be calling," I said flatly. "They gave me one," she whispered quickly. "One phone call, and I chose you, because you have to understand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted security. Daniel and we needed a future. You've lived your life. You've had your success. I thought it was fair if some of it came to us sooner." Her words crawled through the receiver like snakes, familiar in their poison but weaker now, lacking the armor of charm. She sounded desperate, stripped bare of her mask. "You forged my name," I said coldly. "You tried to steal what I built, and you would have left me with nothing. Not even my son. Don't talk to me about fairness." She sniffled, her breath catching. "I loved him. I still love him. Everything I did was for him. He'll never forgive me if you turn him against me. Please, Jonathan, don't take him from me." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "You did that yourself. Every lie, every scheme, every smile hiding a knife. You drove him away, not me." Her voice rose, breaking into panic. "He's all I have left. If you testify against me again, if you push for charges, they'll bury me. You know what prison does to women like me. I won't survive it. Please, please don't let them destroy me." For a moment, silence stretched between us. I could hear her ragged breathing, the raw terror in her voice. A younger Versailles scion of me might have pitied her, but now I saw her clearly for what she was, not a victim, but a predator who had finally stumbled into a cage she couldn't pick open. "You wanted a future," I said, my voice calm as stone. "Then face the one you earned. I'll make no bargains, no excuses. The truth is coming, and it will finish what you started." She let out a sharp sob, then the line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, the quiet of the house pressing in. For the first time in months I felt no rage, no heat in my blood, only finality. Her words had been desperate claws scraping against iron bars, but they hadn't touched me. Because I knew, with unshakable certainty, that her story was over, and mine was still being written. The courthouse felt different that morning. Gone was the tension of uncertainty, the sharp edge of a battle still undecided. Instead, there was a heavy stillness, the kind that comes when everyone knows the ending, but still has to watch it play out. She was led in wearing a beige jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed, her hair tied back without care. The polish, the glamour, the carefully curated mask of grace, all gone. In its place was the stark image of who she truly was. For the first time since I had met her, she looked small, not harmless, but diminished. Daniel sat beside me in the gallery. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes never left her. I could feel his pain radiating beside me, the grief of a man mourning not just the loss of a wife, but the loss of the illusion he had clung to so desperately. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "This court has reviewed the evidence. Forged documents, attempted fraud, recordings of coercion, testimony of prior patterns of exploitation. The conclusion is clear. Mrs. Hale, you are found guilty of attempted financial exploitation, fraud, and forgery." The words struck like hammer blows. She flinched but didn't break, her eyes scanning the room wildly as though searching for someone to defend her. "Sentencing will be as follows," the judge continued. 5 years in state custody, with eligibility for parole after 3. Restitution to be determined based on the financial review. Gasps rippled through the room. 5 years might not have seemed long to some, but to her, to a woman who thrived on control, wealth, and freedom, it was a lifetime in chains. She turned then, her eyes locking on Daniel. There was no apology in them, no remorse, only a desperate plea, a silent demand for him to believe her still. But he didn't move. He didn't rise, didn't speak. His silence was louder than any verdict. As the bailiffs led her away, her screams echoed once more, raw and furious. "This isn't over! You'll regret this! Both of you will regret this!" But her words were hollow now, stripped of power. They bounced off the walls and fell to the floor, forgotten before the doors even closed behind her. I sat there in silence, my hands folded, my heart heavy. Justice had been done. The mask was gone, the predator caged. Yet there was no victory dance, no triumph in my chest, only the ache of what it had cost. I glanced at Daniel. His eyes were glassy, his lips pressed thin. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. He was lost in the wreckage of love betrayed, and I knew it would take time, maybe years, for him to climb out. Justice saves, but it doesn't heal. It punishes, but it doesn't erase the scars. As we left the courthouse together, I felt the weight of both triumph and sorrow. I had fought for the truth, and I had won. But I also knew this. Winning sometimes feels as heavy as losing. That night, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. For years I had prayed for peace, but this kind of silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like aftermath. The storm had passed, but it had left behind broken branches, torn roofs, and scars on the land. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where so much had happened. The meals, the arguments, the careful dances around truths neither of us wanted to face. His hands were clasped together, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. "I don't know how to live with this," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "I loved her, I believed her, I defended her against you, and now—" He shook his head, his throat tightening. "Now I feel like my whole life was built on lies." I let the words hang. There was no rushing grief, no quick balm for betrayal. "You're not the first man to be deceived by someone he thought he knew," I said quietly, "and you won't be the last. But you're still standing. That's what matters." His eyes flicked up to mine, searching, wounded. "But I turned my back on you. I let her drive a wedge between us. How do I ask for forgiveness after that?" The ache in my chest deepened. I leaned forward, my voice steady but heavy. "Son, forgiveness isn't something you ask for with words. It's something you show with the life you live after the fall. You want to make it right? Then stand tall again. Learn from this. Be stronger because of it." He swallowed hard, his lips trembling. "Do you hate me for choosing her?" I shook my head. "Never. I hated what she did to you. I hated how she twisted you. But you? You're my son. That's not negotiable. That's not conditional. Nothing she did can change that." Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back, his pride holding on even as his heart cracked. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're Daniel," I said firmly. "The boy I raised, the man who made mistakes, the son who still has a future. She took a piece of your past, yes, but she doesn't own your tomorrow. That's yours to reclaim." For the first time in months, his shoulders eased, just slightly. He exhaled, a shuddering breath that seemed to release some of the weight pressing down on him. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." I reached across the table and gripped his hand, firm and steady. "Never, and I never will." We sat there in the quiet, father and son, not healed, but mending. The world outside still swirled with noise, headlines, whispers, judgments. But in that kitchen, at that table, we began the slow, painful work of building again. Because love, real love, doesn't shatter when tested. It bends, it bleeds, but it endures. By the next morning, the world knew. Her name was plastered across headlines, her mugshot splashed on every channel, her story dissected by voices who had never set foot in that courtroom. Billionaire N. Early swindled by daughter-in-law. Family torn apart by betrayal. Courtroom recordings expose shocking scheme. Each headline twisted the knife a little differently, some sympathetic to me, others portraying her as a tragic figure who had only wanted security. Talk shows debated her sentence. Legal analysts speculated about her chances of appeal. And always, woven through every narrative, was Daniel's name, spoken with pity, curiosity, sometimes judgment. Reporters camped outside my gate, cameras flashing whenever my car pulled down the driveway. Neighbors whispered, old business partners called to offer hollow sympathies. Strangers sent letters, some praising my strength, others accusing me of cruelty for letting the mother of my son's unborn dreams rot in a cell. Through it all, I stayed silent. Victor urged me to give a statement, to control the narrative. Reed reminded me that silence can sometimes be mistaken for weakness, but I refused. Let them talk, I told them. The truth doesn't need me to shout it, it stands on its own. Daniel, though, wasn't spared. The cameras followed him everywhere, leaving work, stepping out for groceries, even when he tried to walk in the park alone. They asked the cruelest questions, digging into wounds not yet scabbed over. Did you know? Were you complicit? Do you regret defending her? One evening he stormed into my house, his face flushed with frustration. They won't leave me alone, he muttered, pacing the living room. Everywhere I go, I'm the fool who married the fraud. They don't care about her anymore. It's me they want to humiliate. I watched him, my heart heavy. That's because your pain makes good television, I said softly. But son, the world will move on. They always do. The question is, will you? He stopped, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with anger and shame. How do I move on from this? How do I live with everyone knowing I was blind? I stood, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. By remembering that blindness isn't permanent, you see now, and you've chosen truth, no matter how painful. That's strength, Daniel. And one day, the world will see it too. He looked at me then, some of the fury in his eyes dimming. Do you really believe that? I know it, I said, because I've lived it. People will always talk, but their words fade. What lasts is the life you choose to build once the noise quiets. Outside, the cameras flashed against the windows, shadows of a world hungry for spectacle. But inside, we sat together in silence, father and son, knowing that sometimes dignity means letting the storm rage without stepping into it, because truth doesn't beg to be believed, it endures. The months that followed were quieter. The frenzy of cameras faded, the headlines moved on to fresher scandals, and the world's gaze shifted elsewhere. But inside me, the echoes of what happened never left. I often found myself in the study late at night, staring at the shelves lined with photographs. Daniel as a boy holding a baseball bat too big for his hands. Daniel at graduation with that proud, easy smile. Daniel on the day he first told me he'd found love. Each picture reminded me of what I had almost lost. Not just money, not just reputation, but the bond between father and son. She had tried to break that bond. She had tried to turn love into a weapon, trust into a leash, and for a while she almost succeeded. But what she didn't understand was that betrayal doesn't destroy love. It purifies it. It burns away the illusions, the lies, and what remains, though scarred, is unshakable. Daniel and I aren't the same as we once were. We're quieter, more cautious with each other. Sometimes I see the shame in his eyes, the memory of how he doubted me. And sometimes he catches the sorrow in mine, the knowledge that I had to fight my own child's wife to protect him. But slowly, carefully, we are rebuilding. One dinner, one walk, one honest conversation at a time. As for me, I've learned something I never wanted to learn, that the greatest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or markets or even courtrooms. They're fought in the heart. Betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the ones you let closest, the ones who smile as they sharpen the knife. And yet, even in betrayal, there is a kind of gift, the clarity to see who you truly are, and the strength to rise again. I stood at the window one evening, watching the sun set over the fields beyond my home. The sky was painted in fire, and I thought of all I had lost, and all I had kept. Money can be stolen, names can be slandered, reputations can be bent, but dignity, love, and truth endure when everything else is gone. So if you've listened this far, let my story be a warning and a reminder. Beware the ones who smile too easily, who speak of care while reaching for control. And remember this, justice may come slowly, it may come painfully, but when it comes, it strips away every mask. Because in the end, the truth matters. It always has. It always will. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story touched you, if it made you think of your own battles, your own betrayals, your own victories, then share it. And before you go, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what strength means to you, wherever in the world you are listening from, because sometimes strength isn't in winning, it's in surviving long enough to tell the story.